Welcome to this video for round 12 of the candidates and its coverage for the game between Levon Aronian and Vladimir Kramnik, the two pre-tournament favorites by most accounts. For example, I wrote a short blog post for chess.com where I estimated the chances of the players before the tournament, and there I gave Aronian a 40% chance to qualify and Kramnik 20%. So I had really much thought that those two would be heavy in the race. By the way, I gave Vichy 5% for the qualifying spot, so I cannot claim to be much of a fortune teller. I didn't really have any clue that he would fight for the top spot in such impressive fashion. So let's look at this game. There is still lots of sporting relevance for the tournament. Kramnik is basically out of it with he's now on -1, even near the bottom of the table. But Aronian with this +1 score, he's still only 1 point behind Arnold, and with a win, yeah, it might get tricky again. Of course, Arnold needs to lose a game somewhere for it to become exciting again. But nevertheless, this is an interesting matchup. Okay, Aronian playing d4, c4, nothing surprising, and he invites the Nimzo. I'm sorry, he invites the Nimzo, which he sometimes does. It's not a given. He also plays knight f3 in this position. Yeah, and Kramnik now surprisingly plays d5, the classical queen's gambit with an early knight to f6. Very often, of course, this arises through 1d4, d5. And this is not a very common guest in top-level chess, simply because the exchange variation, which Aronian now is actually playing, the exchange variation is considered to be quite comfortable for white. And there are not many black players who want to get to this structure. It is to be noted that here knight takes d5 is also a move that Kramnik in fact had played before, trying to transpose to the semi-Tarrasch line like this. This he had played before, for instance, against Swidler in last year's candidates. But okay, e5, the classical queen's gambit declined exchange variation, also known as the Carlsbad structure. c6, queen c2. Yeah, there are some subtle points about the precise move orders, but I don't want to get too deep into that. Bishop e7, e3, knight d7. All this is very normal. Note that black has not castled yet. This is in fact important for the line that he's now choosing. Here, Aronian has a choice. Almost all players here play the move bishop d3, which is the most flexible move in a way, as you need to put it on d3 anyway, this bishop, and it's not much point in putting the knight on f3, for example, and defining this knight position just yet. He played another move, however, not bishop d3. He played the move h3, which is very rare. It's only played like 2 or 3 times out of, I'm not quite sure, 2,000 games or whatever that I had in the database. h3 is very rare move. What's the point of it? I guess h3 belongs to white's typical setups. It's only normally played somewhat later. For example, just to show what I mean, bishop d3, castles, knight f3, rook e8. This is the absolute main line, or you can also put the knight on e2, but just to show it here, for example, h3 is a very popular move, as it is after castles, knight f8, h3. This is very often played to take away an important square on the king side, preventing moves like knight g4 or bishop g4. And yeah, it's very often a very good strengthening move. There can also be the idea, especially here, h3, knight f8, to play the bishop back and actually have this square available for it. Aronian is playing this move very, very early, but it's not so important for the line that Kramnik is now choosing. He plays the move knight to h5. This is a very well-known maneuver or setup in this line for black that can also be employed against bishop to d3, for example. This is one of the, I guess, best lines for black in the exchange. And it's very comparable here. If you look at this right here, it's the same position, only now we have the pawn on h3 and not the bishop on d3. White now must be a bit careful with this move order. Aronian played knight to f3. Bishop d3 is not really great because of knight f4. The neat little trick. Yeah, and the bishop basically must retreat, which pretty much shows that bishop b3 was a failure. So you need to go to f3. There's not much else. Knight to b6. Yeah, this is played to get the bishop out simply. Long castles. Again, bishop d3 is met by knight f4, and this is not great. So long castles. This is normal. White castles long here, and black, after he plays knight f6 now. This is not necessary move. You can also play bishop to e6. There's nothing wrong with that. Black has two basic setups. He can put the knight back on f6 as Kramnik did, or he can play a setup like this with g6, knight back to g7. For example, let's say something like that. This can also be played by black, intending to play h5, for example, or maybe even f5 at the right moment. f5 needs to be considered very carefully, though, as it gives up the e5 square. But this is another setup that black can play. I like Kramnik's, as though he played knight f6, also controlling e4. And now, after these moves, black is castling long. Putting the knight on f6 has an additional idea, and we see this rather quickly. Black is playing knight d8 to d6. And this is a very useful thing to remember in those card split structures, pretty much regardless if there was short castling, long castling. Here both sides have castled long. The knight on d6 usually is very well posted there. It does a number of things. We can put it on the board here. It does a number of things. The knight is controlling a ton of important squares. It controls c4 and e4, which is very good. It covers the queen side, the important pawn on b7, that is basically the backbone of the pawn structure here. It defends against a possible b4, b5, the minority attack. That is normally played with both sides having castled short, but even with long castles it can be played. And the knight does an additional thing. It supports the idea to play bishop f5 at the right moment to exchange the somewhat bad bishop here. Yeah, what is white's plan in this structure? It's mostly associated with play on the queen side. This is also why he put the king to a1 in the corner, so that at the right moment you might be able to play b4. Not exactly here, but it can be an idea. And the other idea can be to use a rook lift. Yeah, rook on the third rank. This was, for example, played. This rook lift idea was, for example, played in one of the classic games of this structure, played between Kasparov is white and Andersson, the Ulf Andersson, the legendary Swedish grandmaster, from the late 80s, I believe, or early 90s. This game, where Kasparov won a really nice game against Andersson, who was always very tough to beat. Yeah, in this structure, I believe that white in this kind of structure has very slight advantage. He's got a little bit more space and somewhat more options as black, but black is very solid. This is a quite good setup, I believe, for black in the Queen's Gambit exchange. It's not everybody's cup of tea, but it's certainly very playable, a very playable option. Yeah, Aronian put the knight to c5. He could have exchanged on b6, but this does not really trouble black after the recapture. He's got a very compact pawn structure. The double pawn is not a weakness, of course. How should white even attack it in a meaningful way? It makes much more sense to put the knight on c5 as Aronian did. Yeah, Kramnik played g6. Yeah, very normal move. It supports this bishop f5 idea simply. now Aronian played h4. I was quite surprised that I could actually find a game that reached exactly this position, And in this game between Grandmasters Vyacheslav Ikonikov and the black player was Barua from India, there was g4 played, which is also a common motif just to control the f5 square. And in this game, white was, I think, also slightly better after h5 and knight to e5. This is a very important idea to remember. If you after g4, the move h5 is very tempting for black and quite often also quite okay. But you need to always consider that with a move like h5, you alter your pawn structure on the king side. You have now this structure, which means that if a knight appears on e5, which happened in this game, it is very tough for you to play f6 to get rid of the knight, as you can put it on the board, of course, would blunder the house. It basically means that if you push a pawn like h5, you're really influencing directly the center. This is very often not clear to players, that those pawn moves on the side of the board can easily influence other areas of the action. Here h5 is directly related to the e5 square. If you don't play h5, let's say for example black plays a nothing move, yeah, like let's say rook g8. It doesn't make much sense, I know, but I want to show you that after then knight e5, black can play f6 and does not have this this tactical problem on g6. Okay, actually there might be another issue here. Here there's actually this funky move. Quite funny. This you don't want to have. So let's not play rook g8 for argument's sake. Let's play rook c8. And now knight e5, I can play f6 and kick you back. I just wanted to make this point about strategy, that this pawn moves on the side of the board can easily influence the center. Yeah, Kramnik, however, he was faced with another idea. As Aronian played the move h4, he tried to advance on the king side. And this is also related to the mentioned idea of putting a knight on e5. If you imagine this position without h-pawns, yeah, just for argument's sake, let's say h4, and black does nothing, just to show the point. This also fights for e5, as now f6 is again answered by this knight move. Yeah, h5 is a move that fights for e5. It is not really h4. It's a move that fights for the e5 square, which is not directly obvious probably, but this is the idea behind it. Yeah, Kramnik played actually really the move bishop c8 after that. And after h5, he played g5. This was his idea. He didn't want this structure that I was describing. He could have played a bishop instead of bishop c8. He could have played bishop f5. This wasn't a bad move, but I guess after this he was yeah, or maybe knight e5 first. Maybe he was a bit worried that after h5 here he would get some weaknesses on the king side. This looks like a very playable position though. This is what he did, and this cannot be criticized really. It seems like a good option, and even a bit more ambitious option actually. It in a way asks white, okay, what are you doing here on the king side really? Are you going to take on h7, or are you going to do something else? If white does not take on h7, he did that, he took on h7, Aronian. Yeah, what else are you doing? If you play a nothing move like that, black might even just play h6 and try to expand on the king side, and it's not clear what the move h5 really has accomplished. It seems pretty much a given to me that you should take. White takes. And what now? What exactly is black's point? Yeah, he played g4. And this is an interesting concept. Where's white going to go now with the knight? Yeah, he went to h4. It's not a happy square, but here, it's not clear if this is really accomplishing much. Black can, no, not there, sorry. Put a bit too much force into this move. Queen to f6 is an interesting idea. It turns out that black has this idea to put a piece on f5 now, especially in knight, and there is f2 hanging. So if white covers this, for example, oh, there's even this move. This is even stronger. I just saw that. Oh, that's funny. Yeah, it basically comes to the point that white went well with knight h4, queen to f6, and g3. You basically need to do that. I don't really see anything else what white can do. There are some problems with this bishop here. If you play something like that, I'm going to activate my pieces even further. And another idea could be g3 from black. If you imagine a knight here and then g3, the knight could easily land on e3 at the end of all of that. It's not very helpful. g3 is okay. It stabilizes. Knight to c4, and now white voluntarily retreated the bishop. It was very difficult to do anything else, as at some point you will give away the h5 pawn anyway. You cannot keep that pawn. Black can even sometimes just play queen g5 and take it. So he retreated voluntarily in a way. And of course, Kramnik got the pawn back. Rook e1. Yeah, white is toying with the idea to play e4. This is pretty much the only pawn break left that he has. With the pawn on g4, so he has got the queen side, the king side, basically paralyzed, and only e4 is left. What white certainly also like to do is play knight g2 to f4, but that's not easy to accomplish. Kramnik played rook e8. If we now look at knight g2, for example, there is this response which makes the rook really active on h2. I mean, something like that is certainly playable for white, but it's not really helping him much. Black can also all the time get rid of this this knight, maybe not here, of this bishop, sorry. Maybe not exactly here. Maybe you need some prep to do that. Maybe here, knight away, and then bishop f5. Yeah, it looks quite fine for black in my book. It should be about equal. Yeah, rook e2. He played rook h8, queen b3. Yeah, try to tickle a bit here on this square, and black decided, oh sorry, this was too quick. Aronian played e4, really doing something in the center. But Kramnik has a fine response. He played b6, and now knight a4 was played. And I think this is actually a mistake, and a pretty substantial one. Aronian needed to take on d5. This is not an easy move to play, simply because it implies some rather strange tactics, but it seems that you needed to do that. After this capture, I looked at the following lines. Knight a5 is the critical move that asks a very important question. Where are you going to go now with your queen? White goes to b4. There's rook takes d5. This rook is suddenly joining the action and lands on a very good square on d5. Here it's actually not clear how white is going to proceed, because there is a very important move, very important idea, knight takes b5 coming, putting enormous pressure on d4. The move queen to c3 is probably the more testing here. It looks strange because you're giving up a piece, but this is actually a quite interesting position that can get very sharp. Black has those somewhat clumsy knights at the moment. Something like that, for example, can easily happen. This knight is going to get lost with an entirely unclear position. Black is already a piece up, so it's not like he's blundering a piece. Black can also go here, which after the capture and c6 leads to a completely weird position. Very hard to evaluate that. After this capture as mentioned, which is what Aronian probably should have done. Black can also, after this, he can also just recapture, which is not bad at all. After that, white has slight coordination issues and probably should play something like that to get the knight to d3 and possibly to f4. The problem is he needed to do that. What he did, the alternative, was this, what Aronian played. And here it's quite funny because after bishop to a6, knight c5, bishop to c8, knight back, bishop to a6, you get the picture. They agreed on a draw. Okay, this is not a terribly big surprise considering that Kramnik has a really rotten tournament and is certainly not really adverse to playing a draw and get it over with. But there is one thing that needs to be mentioned in this position here, where he played bishop a6 and not just one time, but 2 times. In this position, he had a very strong move available. And this is the move knight to b5. And I'm quite surprised that, well, maybe he just saw the repetition and was glad that the game is over. But knight b5 is simply good for black. It's really as simple as that. The knight is attacking this weakness on d4. And white has no way to really cover that. It's quite remarkable that he didn't go for it. I mean, it's understandable considering the overall situation in the tournament, but black would really have a great position here without anything to worry. Just attack this and what are you doing? Yeah, white can take here, for example, this stuff, but look at this. This is hanging and there is b5 threatened. This is in fact an immediate win. White has simply no move. You cannot even pin the queen as knight b3 wins the exchange outright. It's completely terrible. And yeah, white shouldn't take. He can try. Yeah, he can try to take here maybe. No, the idea being that now knight d4, queen c4 is not great for black. You have, however, knight to a5. And maybe here he did underestimate something. It's just an intermediate attack on the queen, and if it moves, you're going to take with the rook. And now all of a sudden the rook is activated here and puts so much pressure on d4 that you're going to win the pawn. Also note that white has 2 offside knights on a4 and h4. Especially the h4 knight is doing nothing. Yeah, and here white will just lose the d4 pawn. It's like knight b5 is almost winning. It's very tough to see any kind of defense. I mean, I didn't find any, and the computer is just giving like minus 1.5, so it's probably just a flat-out win. And it was, I guess, probably overlooked by both players. I don't know. I didn't see the press conference, but I understand it from a psychological point of view. Kramnik was seeing the repetition and was probably okay with that, as he cannot qualify anymore in any case, even with a win. I guess Aronian was glad that he could get away with the draw after this mistake was made to play here, to play this. He needed to take really on d5. Yeah, a game that pretty much shows that both players are not in excellent shape in this tournament, and it's pretty clear that here Aronian maybe needed to do something to catch Arnold. A draw is not enough, but okay, he simply didn't get anywhere. Kramnik is still a tough defender, of course, and he was even quite lucky at the end that Kramnik didn't go for knight b5. Alright, I hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching.